Creating a believable character that's relatable is no easy task. Sometimes we might have a great plot, but when the character falls flat, the story might not work. So how do you create characters in the real world? In today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 things that I do that can help you create a character that's relatable and have consistency across the entire story. Hi guys, if you're new here, my name is Nani. I'm a writer-director based in Los Angeles. This channel is where I share my writing process as well as my experience of nourishing my creativity. And welcome to join me on this journey of creating characters. So there are a lot of ways to help you build believable characters. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 ways. Number 1, putting your character in a timeline with historical events. I've mentioned about historical events timeline research in my earlier video where I talked about how I do research for my story. And if you are interested, I will make sure to link that video towards the end of this video. But in this video, I want to talk about how do you use historical events to help you build your characters. You might say, well, I'm not writing a historical story. My story time span is very short. Maybe it's a story that happened within a week in today's world, or I'm only writing a romance that has nothing to do with historical stuff, or I'm writing a fantasy that's a world that doesn't exist. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's talk about writing story for the contemporary or short time span or romantic story. So each story, what driven us to watch is the character, that we have to feel what they feel, we root for the character, we understand every decision they make. If the character only making decision by serving the plot to move the plot forward, then the story will fall flat. Every single character should have their own history, have their own life that's prior to the story that you are writing. I'm not talking about background story of what they went through, what happened to them when they were a kid, what's their family dynamic, things like that. What I'm talking about is more of what kind of society they grow up in. So if you have a historical event timeline mapping out from the day that they were born, then you know what they went through. Maybe this character grew up in New York and maybe she was 8 years old when 9/11 happened, or maybe this character have been through civil rights movement, things like that. Understanding your character in this scope can help you understand their psyche and also can help you determine how would they act, how would they talk, things like that. And if your character referencing or commenting about certain events in their dialogue, it kind of help you to make their point without them to say something on the nose directly to the audience, because most of the audience have a common understanding about certain historical events and certain historical events representing certain messages. And if you're writing a fantasy that you might think it's a completely fictional world, that why do you need to referencing the real historical events? But if you really look into it, most of the fantasy are actually creating a world based on the reality. They are creating a magical world, a world that doesn't exist, but somehow they echoing what's going on in the real world. No matter you are writing a fantasy or writing a story in the world that we are living in, the thing is, people's problem, struggle, political problem, it's always the same, and they will impact on their character the same way. Another thing you can do is to referencing certain historical figures, see what their environment that they grew up in or what kind of societal problem they have at that time and how they act, how they behave, and then use that character as a reference to build your character in your magical world, in your fantasy world. And then in that way, that character in your world is kind of a remixed version of someone who is real, but it's kind of original to your world too. In a sense, you kind of have a full foundation for your character creation that, well, able to help you create someone who is full like a human and then very relatable. And then there are some resources I like use to do historical events research. I'll leave in the description down below. One I love to use is National Archives, and another one I like to use, it's a website that have a US history primary source timeline, and then other one is called SEC History, and then they have a very comprehensive timeline throughout the decades. So I'm going to make sure I put those links in the description down below so you can check them out and use those resources to help you build your character in the real world. The second thing I like to do is to study psychology, to learn about the psychological traits of your character. There are lots of different theory in the psychology field. You can pick whatever you are interested in or most close to the character you're trying to create and then learn about them. Once again, it can help you determine how they interact with the world and the people around them, and then that can help you create a very stable character. What I mean by that is sometimes if you watch certain films, you'll recognize some character is not very stable. They don't have consistency across the entire story. It's those kind of time that people might say he is kind of a little bit out of a character right now. When the character doesn't have consistency, it kind of well kills the character for your audience. The reason behind it is in reality we don't change back and forth randomly. We always act and interact with the world based off what our mind tell us to subconsciously, and then those thought process in our mind are built throughout the time through our childhood trauma and our personalities. If you have a character one moment act like this type of person, another moment act like a different type of person, it kind of become unstable. It will create a hard time for your audience to relate to them and then to anticipating their behavior. So it's very important to learn more about psychology and to help you understand different type of characters. There are a few very interesting psychology YouTube channel that I like to watch to learn about different type of people. I'm going to leave them in the description down below so you can check them out. The third thing you can do is to referencing people that you know, observing people, read them, understand them, journaling about them. I think that's one of the most fun thing to do. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but I think it's very important. And then I do this privately. Every notes I took, every thoughts I have, I keep it to myself. I don't gossip or discuss with anyone else. So for taking quick notes, I like to use the note app in my iPhone. Every time when I run into something, someone did something very interesting or out of norm, or somebody said some dialogue that's so philosophical, or someone said something that's so rude or a very interesting way to describe how they feel, I like to write them down right away in my note app and then organize them a little bit later. One thing very fun will happen sometimes is when I'm constantly working on a story and then the characters are keep being in the background of my head working on themselves, the story is working on themselves subconsciously, and when I run into someone, they might say or do something that immediately inspire me or trigger me to think about my character and then realize, oh, my character can do that, my character have similar quality and this could happen to my character, and then would immediately take notes and then to remember them and then trying to find a way to utilize those real life discovery. I kind of call them real life gem, and then kind of universe throw inspiration at me kind of thing. These are the real life examples, so when I use them for my characters, it can help the character feel more realistic, like a real human being. And sometimes I would completely go into pick a person that I know, observe them for a long period of time and completely write that person into the story and use that as a character. I'd like to think this process is to find a way to combine reality and drama. And I think it's quite important because no matter what kind of dramatic story that we're trying to create, ultimately at the end of the day, what we want is audience to relate to those characters and then to really feel the feeling, being touched by them and then by their transformation. Tip number 4 is to focus on fewer traits of the character. There are so many different traits of each character that we can explore, but I think it's very important to pick a few for each character and then focus on those traits. Pick the traits that echoing the story theme and the story world that you're trying to build, so all the characters can serve their purpose to help you build this entire world. Use my feature film as an example. I have 4 different characters and they all have very different personalities and then they have very different flaws, but the trait, the problem that I'm focusing on is they all have the need to feel being accepted. So that one single trait of needing to be accepted is the flaw that I'm focusing on for all 4 characters. But one thing very important is they all acting out differently. So in that way, 4 different characters seemingly have very different personalities, but ultimately what they struggle about in this story is echoing the theme of the story and then the story world that I'm trying to build. Outside of one or a few traits that you discussing in the story, you can still display different personalities, diverse traits for each characters to make them fuller, but you need to always find the focus of what the story is about, not in a sense of the plot, but in a sense of the theme. Number 5 is to get organized. When you're done with collecting those informations, you want to start organizing them for each character. In the past, I write a whole paragraph for each character about those little details, but recently I've been loving to use Notion to get organized for my characters. I use a Kanban board, so each column would be all dedicated to one character. So I add cards under each characters about certain things, how they think, how they feel, what they've experienced, things like that. So at a one glance, you can start get a sense of who they are, what their fear is, and then you will have very comprehensive idea of how would they act in different kind of scenario. In this way, once you get so familiar with them, any kind of plot or situation that throw at them, they know how to act exactly the way they are, and then you will create a character that's very stable, act consistently across the story. So when they experience their self-revelation towards the end of the story, it will make sense for the audience because they already relate to the character and then they fully understand why they do, what their fear is, and then why they decide to make that change. Those are the tips that I use to help me build a character that's relatable with consistency. I hope you either enjoyed this video or find it's a little bit helpful, and if you do, please consider to leave a thumbs up. That can really help me push this video out to share those ideas with more people who wants to write their own story. And if you do like this video, you might also like this one where I share how I do my story research. And thank you so much for watching. Be patient, be present, stay creative. I'll see you next week. Bye.